Mm. All right, welcome everyone to today's fourth webinar as part of Thrive. How wonderful. We're making some real progress here in this webinar series, talking about women's joy and how we can cultivate more loving and healthy relationships with a partner long term. Such an important aspect of mental health and well-being is how women feel in their intimate relationships. It's foundational. So really happy that we have so many therapists here learning about this important topic, because it's going to have a huge impact on the work that you do with your own clients, but it's also going to have a huge impact on your own lives, which is a bit of a win-win, I believe. Okay, so today's focus is on cultivating joy and delight and understanding the importance of what this energy brings into our own lives, but then obviously also into the lives of everyone else around us. And to really cultivate joy and delight, we must understand a little bit about how the unrelenting standard schema can block us from experiencing more joy and delight than we could potentially have access to. All right, so like most of our webinars, I'll present a fair bit of content for the first 45 minutes. Then I'll have a bit of a pause and see what it's brought up for you. And we can unpack, anything that's brought up for you so far, and then we'll go on to the healing and the way forward. All right, just also, I'm aware that at the very last minute, I had to develop a new Zoom link. So I'm really hoping that obviously some of you got the message, which is great news. So I'm sure some other people are linking onto the old one, and then they'll go back to their emails and then discover the new one. All right, so let's make a start. So, as you know, I like to start with an imagery exercise, which invites us to connect to our imagination and to bypass a lot of the mental activity and the thinking that we engage in our everyday lives, and access a bigger feeling, that of expansiveness and our emotions and our desires. All right, so to do that, I am going to turn my camera off so that I can close my eyes, and you're welcome to close or turn your camera off, whatever works for you. Okay, so I invite you all to close your eyes. And take a few moments to breathe in and out. And what I want you to do next is to float back in your imagination, back into your childhood, and get an image of yourself as a little girl in a situation where that little girl was feeling free. For some of you, it might have been when you were outside, just playing in the backyard, in the garden. For some of you, it might have been going on a bit of an adventure in the forest, in the bush. For some of you, it might have been playing with your favorite pet, or seeing other animals. For some of you, you might have been feeling most free when you were playing with other friends. And for some of you, it may have been a more solitary activity in your room, maybe sketching or drawing, or playing a musical instrument, or practicing your dance moves. Now I invite you to bring your adult self into this image and slowly start to approach this little girl, which is you. Notice what happens in your heart when you get closer to her, witnessing her experience this feeling of joy and freedom. And allow yourself to notice whatever else comes up for you in terms of any body sensations, thoughts, beliefs. And as you get even closer to her, you notice that she also notices your presence and stops what she's doing and looks up and makes eye contact with you. And as she makes eye contact with you, perhaps you could offer her a smile. And perhaps you could say something to her to show her how much joy it gives you to see her in this state of joy and delight herself. And just take a moment to appreciate how important her joy is. Not only to her, but also to you, but also to everyone else around her. Just take a moment to really appreciate how undervalued her joy may be to the wider outside world. But what you can do is that you can remind her of how important her joy and her delight is. And that you are a grown-up and you are here to ensure that her joy and delight doesn't get overlooked anymore. Because you are able to take steps to cultivate a life where her joy and delight is a priority. So just take a few more minutes to sit with this realization, and also noticing the response of this little girl, which is you. Perhaps she is surprised because she'd forgotten how important her joy was. Or perhaps she looks relieved, like she's always known this herself and she's just been waiting for you to come along. So when you're ready, you can just take a snapshot of this image and put that photo in your pocket, knowing that you can pull it out anytime that you need reminding. And you can slowly bring your attention back into your body, in the chair, and slowly wriggle your fingers and wriggle your toes, and slowly open your eyes. Lovely. Okay, so you can see why I love imagery so much. It has so much power in it to transport us and take us back to the past, where we can meet a need, meet an unmet need that we may have had in childhood that was not met for whatever reason. And we can sort of rewrite history for ourselves. We can't go back and change the past, but we can change some of the messages and the conclusions and the decisions that we made at a certain point in time. And we can do something different, which I think is such a gift, to be able to use our mind in this way. And one of the reasons I love doing this work. All right, so let's now start to unpack this concept of joy. Okay, so what are we talking about when we're talking about joy? We're talking about an expansive, positive emotional state that has both an emotional quality, which is sort of happiness or excitement or pleasure. It also has a body component, physical and chemical responses in our body that happen. And it also has a mental component, or a cognitive component, which is an ascribing of value to that thing or that activity. To say, well, this is really important, this is good, I want to do more of this. Okay, so let's look at all the ways in which we as women, when we're connected to this little girl, how we might experience joy in our own lives. Some of us, it's just being out in nature. And that can be quite easy for some of us if you live near nature. You're not in a massive city, but there's some kind of bush or ocean or lake or creek near to where you live, then it can be quite easy to access that feeling of joy that comes with being in nature. For some of us, it's about, splashing in puddles and doing something that feels like we're really in a playful mood, and we're not, that life is not too serious or heavy in those moments when we're engaging in playful activity. For some little girls, they like to dress up in cute clothes and do their nails and makeup and pretend to be princesses. And that's also a lovely source of joy for some little girls who, are inclined towards sort of that aspect of their own playful nature. for some, so this is more like me as a child, it's about connecting to music and creating music or listening to music. So for me, I played the flute from the age of 9, and I still get a lot of joy from classical music, hearing classical music, and just the beauty in that. So this is a lovely image here of this little girl singing her heart out and busking, and I bet she is just loving it. All right, so then now let's explore this concept of delight. Okay, so when we're talking about delight, well, this is my definition anyway, it is about when some kind of beauty or experience in the outside world resonates with us through our 5 senses. And we experience the delight that is given by that thing that we're witnessing. Okay, so that could be in the form of what we see, our eyes, when we're witnessing beauty, such as this beautiful lotus flower on a pond. Okay, it could also be smell, obviously. So my favorite is fresh oriental lilies that I like to buy at the markets. But for some of you, it might be like incense, or some of you, it might be your favorite perfume or essential oils, or even just the smell of grass when it's mowed, or just all the wonderful ways that smell can give us an experience of delight. And then there's obviously art and sculptures that we could just marvel at for hours and hours and hours. About 5 years ago, my partner and I went to Italy and Spain when I attended the Schema Therapy conference in Barcelona, and we just got to witness so much beauty that you wouldn't normally see in Australia. And I can just remember the response in my body just walking around places that you kind of just read about or see on the internet. So that is this experience of delight when the 5 senses are just overloaded with pleasure. Then, of course, there's music, or sound, whatever makes your heart sing when you hear particular types of music. Like I said, for me, it's classical music and electronic music, or preferably the 2 of them combined. Then there's taste. Okay, so whatever foods give you that experience of delight, and prioritizing these. So for an example, I had a female client and she just loved raspberries, but she said, oh, I don't like to buy them because my husband thinks they're too expensive, they're a waste of money. And I encouraged her to shift her perspective on this, because I mean, they were spending money on other things that cost more than raspberries. But the delight that eating raspberries gave her was being undervalued in their marriage. And it really struck home for me, this message that that experiencing delight through the 5 senses is not important, or the message that it's not important. And also looking at the shift that happens in women when they start to appreciate the importance of joy and delight and beauty, and start factoring that into our day-to-day lives. And here we have touch and the wonderful sensation of having a scalp massage and just that sort of state of pleasure that it can take us into. And all of these things that I've just described invite us out of our head and into our body, so that we can be more sensitive to life. Actually, we become more sensitive to everything that's going on around us when we're more in our bodies, because we're more in the present moment, as opposed to when we're in our heads. We could be not in the present moment. We could be in tomorrow, or we could be in 1 week from now, planning and going through our to-do lists and figuring out what needs to happen next, as opposed to being fully in the present moment. Okay, so now let's start to have a look at what's gone on in life that may have resulted in us being so disconnected from our physical bodies and from this source of joy and delight. So the main schema that I want to focus on today to understand this is the unrelenting standards schema. Okay, so I'll just read out the definition of this schema for those of you not familiar with all the schema names. Okay. So what do we have? So the unrelenting standard schema is the underlying belief that one must strive to meet very high internalized standards of behavior and performance, usually to avoid criticism. Typically results in feelings of pressure or difficulty slowing down, and in hypercriticalness towards oneself and others. Must involve significant impairment in pleasure, relaxation, health, self-esteem, sense of accomplishment, or satisfying relationships. So the unrelenting standards typically present as either A, perfectionism, inordinate attention to detail, or an underestimate of how good one's own performance is relative to the norm. B, rigid rules and shoulds in many areas of life, including unrealistically high moral, ethical, cultural, or religious precepts. Or C, preoccupation with time and efficiency so that more can be accomplished. Okay, so this is a schema that is really high in health professionals. So many of us here on the call will identify with having this schema. Not all therapists have this schema, but if you didn't have it when you started your degree, you'll probably have it when you come out of your degree and when you continue in the profession, because there are unrelenting standards on performance and ongoing, professional development and learning that sort of creates this stress response in the body and has us go up into our heads, planning, sort of analyzing, learning new information. Okay, so there's a couple of pathways towards this unrelenting standards schema. And the first is a direct pathway. Now here I should say in the family and culture. Okay, so I will change the slides here. The direct pathway in the family and in the culture that we grow up in, there may have been a high value placed on winning, getting first place, getting awards, excellence, striving, academic or sporting performance. So that's a direct message to the child that your performance is highly important. And there's also an unspoken message that your worth is connected to your performance and your achievement. Also, there might have been in the family or in the culture, there might have been a high value placed on order, routine, neatness, and tidiness, and timeliness probably as well. And, being on time. I still have time anxiety. even if it's to go for like a lunch catch up or a social catch up, you know, and if it starts at 12, I have anxiety if I'm not going to make it there by at least 12:03. So that sort of, I mean, that's partly personality and temperament of mine around conscientiousness, but there's also been a real reinforcement of that message about how important it is for this sort of perfectionism and to be on time and get things right. Sure, some of you are relating. Okay, so then there's also an indirect path to the unrelenting standard schema. And in schema terms, we might call it a secondary schema or a coping schema when the unrelenting standards and perfectionism is in response to a deeper schema, a more painful schema. So for example, if the child grew up in an environment where there was a fear of abandonment, where there was abuse or neglect, so they may have mistrust abuse schema, where there was emotional deprivation, so an invalidating of their emotions and needs, where there might be defectiveness shame in the case that a child was given the message that she's unlovable or unworthy of love or not good enough, or something wrong with her, then those schemas can lead to more painful emotions such as loneliness, shame, and fear. And then, you know, and then the unrelenting standards schema sort of comes in to kind of cover up or mask some of those deeper, more painful schemas. Because, you know, when we strive for achievement and we have that sense of accomplishment and importance, although it can create some stress, some short-term stress in our lives, the dopamine hit that we get from the external reward of having, you know, a teacher pat us on the shoulders and say, well done, you get the gold star, or we get the trophy or the gold medal at school, that instant reinforcement can mask the deeper, more painful emotions associated with these other primary schemas. So that's an indirect pathway. So we're not getting a direct message that you must achieve, you must do well. The direct message is maybe that you're unlovable or life is unsafe or you're not protected here. And then achievement is a way to sort of elicit a more positive emotional state and sort of cover up the more painful emotions. So that's something to consider and to look out for in our own lives, as well as the clients that we're working with. Okay, another indirect pathway, this is big, especially in women, okay, which is the self-sacrifice pathway. So self-sacrifice can lead to perfectionism more in the helping domain. So not so much academic achievement or wanting to get good grades or sporting trophies, but wanting to get the gold medal on the home front, you know, being seen as being a good girl. And this happens for children who have been parentified, who were required to do the parenting or take care of a parent or caregiver due to the parent or caregiver's own limitations. Maybe they had a mental illness or physical illness, or, you know, there weren't a lot of resources in the home, not a lot of support. So the child was required to provide the support. That often leads to the self-sacrifice schema. Okay, and so when this self-sacrifice schema occurs in little girls or in little boys, what it can do is that the child gets reinforced for the sacrifices that they're making. So they're getting the message, you're such a good girl for being so helpful and doing everything at home and looking after me. This also leads to the same kind of reinforcement and chemical dopamine hit that we get from getting the gold medal at school. And what it can do is that later in life, it can lead us to striving more for this sort of moral goodness via sacrificing our own energy and only ever giving to others, looking after other people's needs, prioritizing other people who we see as less fortunate than us. The problem with that is that we're never in a receptive mode. We're never open to receiving help is one thing, but also we're not open to receiving the nourishment that is available in day-to-day life when we stop and pause and we're not in a giving mode. This is massive, and you're going to see it in lots of female therapists, and you're going to see it a lot in your female clients who are yet to heal this self-sacrifice schema and really understand the importance of the reciprocity, which is a natural part of life. Giving, receiving, giving, receiving. You know, when it's time to focus on other people in the outside world, and when it's important to focus on our own energy and our own mood. Okay, so there's lots going on in the brain, which is why it can be so addictive. Okay, so stress hormones themselves are addictive for a couple of reasons. The stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, firstly, they might feel familiar to some of us and feel like home because it's what we knew growing up, this sort of the drama around us and what goes on in our bodies in response to the drama around us. So some of us might actually develop a massive tolerance and even a preference for this sort of being in this stressed state. Also, stress is linked to dopamine release, which is addictive in itself because, you know, our ego will get an instant reward telling us that we're winning in life whenever we overcome a challenge. So there's this sort of like, yes, I saw 40 clients this week. There's an addictive quality that occurs in terms of this dopamine hit when we sort of tick something off or we feel like we met a certain standard. Okay, which also allows us to experience the short-term relief from the stress because there's this sort of positive emotion that goes with that. So it's something to be very mindful of in our own lives, the extent to which we might be addicted to stress and drama, in which case we can find ourselves loading ourselves up with too many demands in our life, which is going to take our focus away from being connected to our bodies, and it's going to put us in our heads. Because as long as there's stress and drama, then there is a problem, which means as long as there's a problem, we need to problem solve and we need to figure out the problem and analyze what needs to happen. And it puts us in our head and we're not in our bodies. And so probably by now you're starting to really see the link between how this can filter into our intimate relationships, how it can impact the connection that we have with a partner if we're always in our heads. All of our focus is going into solving problems, looking after other people and responding to drama, as opposed to being more present in our own bodies. Okay. All right, so the other thing I want to say about an unhealed, unrelenting standards schema is how it's linked to partner selection. Okay, so some of the content that I'm talking about today is going to be, you know, triggering. It's sensitive content because some of us may be currently caught in this pattern. And sometimes hearing this content or hearing it spoken about in this way is like, whoa, a bit of a, a bit of a hammer. But as therapists, I feel like we have a responsibility to be aware of these patterns, because if other female clients are coming to you for support with these patterns, we want to be able to have the bigger picture in our minds and sort of see what's potentially going on. And to do that, we also need to be aware of the broader cultural and historical events that have led to this point in life right now, where so many women are caught up in this cycle of overachieving. And it's having often a negative impact on our intimate relationships. Okay, so the aspect of partner selection is that let's take a woman and let's say she's unaware of her unhealed, unrelenting standards schema. She doesn't realize that she has this pattern, that it's even a thing. She just thinks that this is normal. This is how life is. You sort of work these massive weeks, and you go home and you sort of just crash, and then you recover, and then you do it all over again. So if she's in that pattern, in this schema, she may overlook the low levels of autonomy and independence in a partner in the early stages of dating. And a lot of the with women who are currently single are well aware of this, because they've been in a relationship with a partner who has low levels of autonomy and independence, and it didn't work. It didn't end well. They became resentful. It interfered in the attraction with that partner. So how does this happen? Well, as a woman, if we're preoccupied with taking charge of things, making things happen, being financially independent, being a go-getter. So this is me, this is my story, sort of 10 years ago. I wish someone had done a webinar and said exactly what I'm saying in this slide, and a massive light bulb would have gone on for me. But it doesn't matter, because I got there in the end. Okay, so what is important is that we can identify when it's an unrelenting standards schema, which is going to lead to physical burnout, emotional burnout, and resentment, versus normal striving and achievement in your career, like progressing, making progress, and developing expertise in your work, but not to a point that it detracts from your own well-being, and not to the point that it detracts from your personal life. Okay, I really hope that you can see the difference between those two. Okay. So the healing for the unrelenting standard schema, especially in the realm of dating and relationships, especially if you find yourself attracted to more masculine energy partners, you want to be with a partner who is very autonomous and you can feel safe with, and you can feel like you can relax in their presence, especially if you're that kind of woman that is looking for that in a partner. Then the discipline for us, high functioning women, is to learn to sit on our hands, to do less. Because guess what? We've already got well-developed masculine energy. Many of us, high functioning, high achieving women, have already got well-developed masculine energy. That's already something that we've developed in our life, and we're able to be autonomous and be independent and problem solve and figure things out. Okay, that's not the problem. The problem is when we're constantly doing and solving all the problems, then sometimes we don't get to see if a partner brings that same kind of energy to the table. So if you are someone who is interested in having a partner with integrated healthy masculine energy, who is autonomous, who knows how to get shit done, who, you know, is disciplined, who shows up, who's consistent, then the discipline for us is sometimes not stepping in and filling the void. And just, you know, seeing how it all unfolds, seeing what this person brings to the table. Do they keep showing up? If you don't organize anything, if you don't organize the next catch up or the next date, do they organize it? Do they reach out and make contact with you and say, hey, what are you up to this weekend? If they're not doing that, then I don't know what's going on. We could analyze what's going on there, but whatever, they're not bringing their own healthy masculine energy to the table with you. And that's really important. If they're not taking steps towards, you know, organizing ways to catch up with you, then that's a red flag, because then it may suggest that a lot of that organizing and doing and getting shit done might fall on your shoulders, which we're kind of used to. We're used to carrying that load. So sometimes we can be unaware that we're doing it. Okay, so let's talk about the mental load before we have a bit of a pause and see, you know, what this is bringing up for you. Okay, so the mental load is a term for the invisible labor involved in managing a household and family, which typically falls on women's shoulders. Also sometimes referred to as worry work or cognitive labor. The mental load is about not the physical tasks, but rather the overseeing of those tasks. Okay, so all of us are familiar probably with this mental load. We know we're in it. We know that many, many, many other women are in it. And when we realize this mental load and the imbalance, sometimes we become angry, and we should. We should get angry because there's an imbalance and there's not fairness. So, you know, whenever there's not fairness, we should feel angry. But today we're going to talk about sort of the pathway out of just being constantly stuck in that state of overload. All right, so at this point, let's just pause and look at what the bigger problem is here. The bigger problem that I think we're facing when we've got the unrelenting standard schema is an undervaluing of the feminine aspect of life. Okay, so on our pathway towards success and achievement, which is more of a masculine value, and that's fine. It's not to undermine the importance of success and achievement. I mean, many of us are actually wired towards achievement and progress and intellectual pursuits. You know, it's at the core of who we are. That's not the problem. The problem is that many of us have lost touch with the aspect of life that is more focused on connection, relationships, emotions, beauty, nature, and the mystery of life. So I would like to just ask a few reflective questions that you don't need to answer, but I just invite you to ponder the answer for yourself. And that is, what value do you give to beauty and pleasure in life? And And even what is the meaning of beauty and pleasure to you? That's another important question, is being able to define for ourselves, each of us individually, define for ourselves, what does beauty and pleasure mean for us? Okay. Also, how important do you believe your mood and your energy is to your overall relationship health? Okay, that's a big question. Do you think your mood and your energy is at the center of your relationship health? Or do you see it as more just on the periphery? It's not the most important thing. You know, it's something to consider. I mean, for me personally, I've just been realizing, you know, for the past 5 years or so, just how important my mood and my energy is to the health of my relationship. And so therefore it's at number 1 on my priority list. Okay, and also, what new boundaries are you willing to install in your relationship so that you can better protect your energy? You know, how willing are you to start to have conversations that center around your well-being and your mood, your energy, you know, as a really key conversation, not just in passing. So a lot of my coaching work involves supporting women to have these big conversations with a partner. And some of the women that I work with have been in their relationship for 20 years. So it's a new conversation that they're bringing to the table. So you can imagine some of the pushback that you get when you're installing a new boundary that hasn't been there for 20 years. And, you know, I'm just going to briefly mention this term male privilege, and it's not to get us all riled up and all, you know, feeling helpless and hard done by, but it's more to say, if you were given privileges in your culture, in your family growing up, you're going to feel quite entitled to having those privileges, and you're not going to want to give them up easily. So we have to sort of, you know, consider that in the big scheme of things. When we're first starting to install a boundary that's asking our partner to give up some of their freedom, some of their time, some of their energy, so that we can experience more energy, more freedom, there's going to be pushback. There just is. Of course, it's natural. It's human nature for there to be pushback whenever someone has to give up a benefit, something that they've benefited from. Okay, but we just accept that. Oh, there's going to be a bit of pushback. That's okay. But keeping the big picture in mind, we're not just going to have this conversation once and then drop it. We're going to really prioritize it until it lands. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here and ask anyone who would like to share to come off mute. And even if it's, you know, just a reflection on, you know, you being caught in this unrelenting standard schema in the past, does this resonate? Or taking on too much of the mental load, carrying too much of the responsibilities in your relationship, being the one who's always doing the organizing and feeling resentful that, you know, a partner doesn't step into that space. So feel free to put your hand up and we'll just have a little pause here. See see, are there any questions or any reflections? Give it a couple more seconds. No. Well, hopefully it's all resonating, all landing for you. Or you can ask a question also in the chat box if you prefer to do it that way. If there's any questions so far? Okay, so let's go on to the solution. So the solution, and it starts off as very much as an individual solution, something that we start to put into practice in our own lives, in our own relationships. And then it kind of expands outwards, because the way that us as individuals go about our life and the changes that we make and the new boundaries that we put in place in our lives, in our relationships, and start to enjoy the benefits of that, then we have stories to share with other people around us, and other people kind of adopt our solutions and our new perspectives. So can you sort of see how the solution starts with us as individuals, and then it sort of shifts out into the broader community and culture, and then we start to do things differently. And an example of that is just how different women are approaching relationships now, who are the millennials, the younger women in their 20s and 30s, could probably run this webinar. Because they're far more connected to their own power. There's a lot more shift towards celebrating the feminine in the past 20 years compared to when some of us Generation X or baby boomers were in that stage of life where we were wanting to meet a partner and make a long-term connection with someone. So, the shifts are already happening, and it's amazing. And that makes me very happy, because I've got two daughters who are 10 and 13. And I don't want them to grow up with an unrelenting standard schema and approach their home life or personal life with that as the main. Okay, so let's talk about the solution now. So the solution is a reprioritizing of the feminine. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, we have to start by doing that ourselves as an individual. We have to say to ourselves, I want to invite more of this other aspect back into my life. I want to start prioritizing the feminine in me, which includes how I feel, my day-to-day emotional state, my physical energy levels, and the quality of my relationships and my connections, and cultivating harmony. You're not going to have harmony every day. We accept that. We accept that, especially if you've got children, harmony is more likely to be moments of harmony, because children are very chaotic. Okay, but there's a valuing of harmony, of moving towards more harmonious interactions at home. So that has to start with us, and then we start to communicate this value to the people around us. And then there's pushback and resistance, and there's a period of kind of adapting to this. But I can assure you, you step into your own power as a woman, and you say, women are powerful, and I'm a woman, and the feminine in me wants to be expressed in life, and it's good for this side of me to be expressed in life. When you start to trust in the feminine in you, you become quite unstoppable, unstoppable. And the outside world and the masculine kind of has no choice. It's not in a manipulative way. It's just, this is just how life works, yin and yang. The feminine wants to express this need, this desire, and the masculine sort of steps forward to support it. And the exact same thing happens in ourselves as individuals. I mean, the feminine in me wants to teach this content with other women. Okay, that's a desire that's coming from my heart. I want to teach other women to sort of know some of this stuff. I want to get it out here, give people the structure, the framework to understand this better, especially to other therapists, because, we like to use mental frameworks and cognitive models to understand things. That's a feminine desire in me. The masculine in me says, right, okay, how can I support that desire in you? Okay, so can you see that it takes us to trust the desire that's coming from our heart? We have to trust that that's a good thing, that needs to be expressed. I want to work less. I want to change my career. I want to have more time with the children. All of these are desires coming from our heart, but we need to sort of trust in the intrinsic value of those desires for the masculine to step forward and say, right, okay, I want to support you in that desire. All right. So let's look at, firstly, this process of shifting the mental load. Okay, so I'm no expert on the mental load. This is not something I've done a thesis on or, anything like that, but it's something that I've had to address in my own life. And also when you sort of have, a training in psychology, so you can kind of see what mindset shifts and what behaviors are going to support a shift in the mental load. Okay, so I'll come up with a process. I encourage you to develop your own process if you are a parent and you have a high mental load, or if you're in some other kind of situation where it feels like you're carrying too much of the burden and it's impacting on your well-being and therefore your relationship. Okay, so the process that I have gone through in my own life, and I'm happy to share with anyone else for who this lands, is firstly, I believe that we need to privately acknowledge and validate the burden of the mental load. Okay, so the minute that we recognize that we're stuck in this high mental load and we're feeling resentful and burnt out, I invite you to pause and go inwards and give words to it and say, this is the mental load that so many other women are talking about. And validate that yourself by saying, yes, I'm in it too. This is real. This is real. I'm stuck in it. And yes, it's having an impact. I'm not making this up. So you can see how you're validating it yourself, which takes the pressure of seeking that validation from a partner. Because if you're a bit shaky about whether this is a real thing or whether you're making this up in your head, then you're not going to approach the conversation with much certainty. Okay, you're going to sort of be very tentative when you start talking about it with your partner. Okay, so I invite all of us to start with this more private inner experience. Okay, the second step is that, and I've done all of this with myself and with my clients, as women, I invite us to celebrate and take ownership of our leadership role in the home, which is of vital importance to our own and our family's well-being. You know, how things are at home is vitally important. Not just how successful someone is in their career, how much money they're earning. They're important things, they help. But of vital importance is the environment that we have at home. So I invite women to just take ownership of this important leadership role and say, you know, okay, I have more of a leadership role when it comes to being the decision maker about what happens at home, because I'm more attuned perhaps to my children's needs, more aware of all the moving parts, the chaotic nature of family life, you know, and I'm more wired to sort of be focused on what's going on at home than my partner is. It's a biological reality that might be a little bit of a hard pill to swallow because it suggests a gender difference at times. But if you can push through the gender difference and accept, firstly, that there is a difference in our leadership, you know, our leadership ambitions or drives. It's not to say that we're not also ambitious out in the world. I am ambitious out in the world, but I'm also very driven to make sure that the family and home environment is harmonious. And if we're being honest, then at least in my relationship, I'm probably 100 times more attentive to what's going on with children's needs than my partner, and also prioritizing those and seeing them as important. That's not the case in all relationships. In some, there's more of a sort of an equal sort of, you know, bit more both on the same page. Okay, but I invite you to celebrate and take ownership. If you are a leader in the home environment, that's a very important role to play. And to accept that more of my attention, more of my energy is going into making sure that things at home are okay. Okay. Then step 3 is to shift our mindset from a more capitalist focused view of life and work, which might be, you know, well, the highest income is the most valuable to our family, to a more holistic picture, which is, you know, well, running a household is the equivalent of one full-time job, and it's as important as, you know, my husband's job, which is, you know, developing new buildings to be built, or being an accountant and doing people's taxes. Yes, they're important tasks, but the task of raising a family is of utmost importance. So we need to shift our mindset away from, oh, well, you know, if someone earns this much money, then they're the most important figure in this family, to one which values both the importance of financial protection and resources and the importance of attuning to the family and the children. So I invite you to shift away from any kind of hierarchical model where you put income potential at the top, and shift to more of a, like I said, a holistic picture, which is all of these parts are important. And running a home is the equivalent of a full-time job. Okay, So now things are starting to improve with this picture when we're shifting the mental load. Okay, step 4, change your language around how you speak to your partner about wanting to look at the mental load and distributing tasks at home more evenly. So we'll go through a dialogue in a second around language. Also, I really believe that it's important that we communicate to our partners the impact that this mental load is having on our energy and mood, about having to carry too much of the mental load. So it's really important to share the impact that it's having on us by saying, you know, it's starting to affect the way that I'm feeling. Okay, and then finally, identify what tasks you want to delegate to your partner, have them take ownership of, so that you can release those things from your load. Okay, and in doing that, we want to ask our partners to take full responsibility for the initiation, execution, completion, and repetition of this task, so that you can free your mind of it. Okay. Now, it's not realistic that we're going to be completely free of any kind of mental load if you're a parent, but it is realistic to have a shift in this, where you're starting to reclaim some of your time and energy and mental freedom, so that you don't have to be in your head so much of the time. All right, so let's have a look at a dialogue, the importance of language when we're communicating this, because you know, sometimes when we first recognize that things are so imbalanced, we can feel very angry and resentful and like we've been hard done by. And if we feel like we've been victimized, you know, as part of this process, which we have been, then sometimes we can see our partners as the enemy. And we want to avoid, as much as possible, seeing our partners as an enemy, because this is going to come out in our language and the way that we speak with our partners. If we start saying, you don't care about me and you always do this and you're inconsiderate, then they're going to feel attacked and they're going to get defensive. They can't not get defensive. So that's why the importance of language. Okay, so here's an example of a dialogue if you are raising the mental load with your partner. And it's just an example. So you can come up with your own language, your own wording that sits with you and matches your personality and your temperament. Okay, so here's my example. Okay, well, firstly, I might sort of introduce it and say, you know, is it okay if we have a chat sometime this evening, just about how we're sort of running things at home? You know, do you have space for that? Okay, so an invitation. Okay, so then I might start by saying, you know, raising a family and running a household takes as much energy and focus as one full-time job. And can you see in that statement the certainty? There's no doubt in there. There's no tentative language in there. You know in your bones that running a household and raising children is as stressful and challenging. It could be more challenging than your day job. Okay, so you already know that the energy that it takes to raise a family is equivalent of a full-time job. Okay, so you say that. Then you might talk about your values. So you could say, you know, I place a huge degree of importance on how things run at home, and no less importance than our jobs that pay us money. So much of my energy goes into making sure our kids are getting all of their needs met, And I find this rewarding, but also very challenging. And I'm finding it's starting to really impact my well-being. So I would like to hand over a few of the key tasks to you so that I can be more free and reconnect with my body and not be in my head so much of the time. Being in my head means that I'm constantly thinking about what needs to be done next. And then I disconnect from my body and I feel closed off to physical and emotional intimacy. How does this sound to you? Okay, so I mean, you don't need to memorize a speech or anything, but I'm just giving you the essence of a very reasonable conversation, but also it's inviting. There's a lot of connecting language in there, but it's also maintaining your sense of autonomy, sort of your truth, what you know to be true. And not putting too much emphasis on how your partner's receiving that or what they might be thinking of what you're saying, but just staying really connected to your own truth. And having a well-developed inner masculine allows us to stay connected to our own truth and be autonomous and have our own opinion on something and not be easily swayed or wavered by our partner's reaction. Because remember, our partner is going to push back at first to this. If you're setting a boundary that involves them giving up some of their freedoms so that you can enjoy more freedom, there's going to be resistance. Okay, we're okay with that. So because we know there's going to be resistance, then we're going to need to be quite sturdy in this conversation. So you could practice saying this. You could print this out. You could say it out loud over and over and over again until you find your own language, your own wording, you know, keeping in mind your relationship and the ways that you communicate with your partner. But this is like 100% appropriate for me to say in my relationship. And this is the sort of way that I communicate in my relationship, and my partner listens and takes it on board. He's a very rational person and everything that I've said there is very rational and reasonable. So, but it's also coming from the heart. It's also communicating my values, which is expressing, you know, the feminine side of me. And it's also communicating how much I value my relationship with him and our connection, so he can see the bigger picture when I'm speaking in these ways, because I'm not just saying, what about me? What about me? I'm kind of saying, what about us in this dialogue? All right. So you can take that and adapt that in whatever way works best for you, but maybe the first step for you is just to become aware of the mental load. Maybe for you, the mental load is not a thing, not a problem, but it will be for some of your clients. Okay, continuing with the solution. Daily practice of joy and delight. Okay, so it's about prioritizing and placing a lot of value on this experience of joy and delight, like what we spoke about at the start of the webinar. So just take a moment to consider what would allow you to feel more connected to your own body. So some examples could be a slower morning routine. That made a huge difference to me. You know, generally I don't see clients before 11 a.m. because, you know, the time that it takes to get up, get my kids ready for 2 different schools, get them off to school, by then it's already 9 o'clock and I haven't had a moment to myself, which is fine, but I make, you know, then I've got 2 hours to myself take it slowly. Have a coffee, just, sit out in the backyard and look at the trees and look up at the sky, or go for a paddle board or something like that. What else? A break. So some kind of break in there between parent duties and work for yourself. So that's what I've just described. What else? Releasing one or more tasks from your load. If you're in a relationship with a partner, then look at what are the tasks that you would most like to release from your load. Like, what would make the biggest difference? Like, oh, well, if I didn't have to be the one to, watch the soccer games on the weekends, which may mean that a partner might need to give up their activity that they do on the weekends so that you can be the one that's doing your activity on the weekends. That's a process. But also, I mean, couples can come up with really creative solutions. Like, there might be a situation where the partner says, right, well, I'm going to finish work at 3 o'clock every Friday or twice a week. And I'm going to be the one that does the school run so that you can go do your class, not work more, but, you can go and do the thing that restores your sense of energy or gives you joy. What else? Engaging in restorative or nourishing practices first and then working. Because if we say, okay, well, I've got to just work, and then maybe if I have time this afternoon, I'll go and do this other thing for myself. And often it doesn't work like that. So we sort of flip that. What else? Understanding your menstrual cycle and how this is tied to your energy levels and your productivity. So men typically have a 24-hour cycle, and women have a 28-day cycle. And in fact, there's even a movement where there's like a moon diary. So business owners who structure their schedule around their moon cycles, their menstrual cycles. So, so week 1, might be where you're being super productive, etc. Week 4, downtime, etc. Creating a home environment or space in the home that gives you delight and pleasure. So that could be just a tiny little garden that you have, even if you're living in an apartment, you might just have a little box in the corner on the balcony where you plant your herbs, or some kind of beautiful altar or space that you create where you celebrate delight and pleasure. And also bringing the 5 senses and beauty and nature into your daily life. Okay. All right. Also, part of the solution is feminine-centered physical intimacy. So in my coaching with women, a lot of them come to me and they're talking about, a disconnect in the sexual relationship. And, there could be a whole range of reasons for that. And this is a massive topic, and we're not going in depth into this with regards to, more serious sort of aspects that could be going on there. That's just not my area. I'm not a sexologist, so I don't deal with clinical sexual problems. And I'm certainly no Tantra teacher. I'm more of a student and have sought out teachers in that area. What I do work with is schemas and emotional blocks. Okay, and as you can gather from today, there is such a massive component when it comes to women's openness for sexual intimacy. It could be so many reasons. Women's sexuality is very complex. We need to appreciate that. There's no linear kind of formula that, oh, well, if I just do this or just do this, that's going to solve that problem. Okay, it could be many things. One obvious one is that there could be unprocessed sexual trauma from the past, where obviously there needs to be some kind of therapy and healing work done with someone who is trauma informed. The other is that there could be certain messages around shame that we got from the culture that have us feel shame about our bodies, shame about our own pleasure and desire. So that's something also to work through, you know, with a therapist or coach. But the other thing is just this sort of prioritizing and valuing what's going on in our own bodies and being honest with ourselves about our current openness to sexual intimacy. So in my coaching work, I encourage women to sort of put their openness at the top of the list when it comes to priorities about, you know, whether to engage in physical intimacy or not with a partner. I would say to the female client, start by checking in with your own body. You know, is there an openness? Could you be open today to that? And if not, it's a no. And that's not meant to be as a you know, a manipulative thing where we say, you know, no, no, no. That's meant to create space in us to go inwards and say, you know, what's going on for me that's leading to this feeling of being closed off. And, you know, this journey itself could take you 6 months. It could take you a year. It could take you 2 years of unpacking, you know, really understanding the key reasons for our own feelings of being closed off. But I think if we can just start with honesty, being honest with ourselves, then that is more likely to lead to more honest conversations with a partner. And one of the beautiful sayings that I love that helps to guide women in this area is, you can only go as fast as the slowest part of you, which one of my previous coaches said, which means if you're feeling shut off, if you're feeling too vulnerable, if there's too much of a big wall there, then that's just where you're at. Okay, and our work in our intimate relationships is to be curious about what are the things that lead to us feeling open and what are the things that lead to us feeling closed. And to do the work to understand that and to see if we can release that or see if we can't release that. And if we can't release that, to find ways to communicate with a partner. Okay. So, I mean, there's situations, there's all kinds of situations and relationships that exist, from, you know, relationships between couples who are both on the exact same page with sexual intimacy, through to couples where there's, you know, a difference in their, you know, their sexual needs, right through to couples where there's no physical or sexual intimacy, and they've addressed that and processed that, and agreed that they want to continue to be in a relationship with one another, even though there's no sexual intimacy. And that could just be what that couple needs to do to honor both people in the relationship. Okay, so I encourage all of us to sort of be open to all different variations in intimate relationships to not have any particular rule and not have any particular timeline or time pressure that we're trying to work towards. Okay, so getting webinar. So what we're really doing with this energy of joy and delight is reconnecting with the little girl. So if that for you means going back over the imagery that we did at the start of this webinar and looking for that little girl inside of you, the little girl in you that experiences joy and delight as her natural birthright, and looking for the activities and situations and experiences that enhance her experience of joy and delight, whether that means taking up your musical instrument from your childhood, or your dancing, or starting to dress in a way that lights you up, or listening to music that lights you up, or starting to buy yourself fresh flowers in your home, or whatever it is that cultivates that experience of delight. And when we do that, the outcome of us prioritizing our own joy and delight is then it becomes a gift. Okay, so not only do we receive the direct benefits of this practice in our own lives, and we get to experience firsthand our own source of joy and energy. And the benefit is that, you know, we feel safe and alive in our own bodies. Okay, that's the gift to ourselves. Okay, also we start to have, you know, from a mental perspective, we have this sense of balance and fairness in our relationship. Because when we don't experience joy and delight in our relationship, we start to feel like we've drawn the short end of the straw. Now, when we're more likely to be in a state of openness to physical and emotional intimacy from this place of joy and delight, compared to when our bodies are constantly stressed, overwhelmed and closed off, and all of our energy is in our heads. So for some of us, you know, this is the path that we're wanting to take, is that we're wanting to release some of the tension that has us close off from physical intimacy. It's not the path for everyone, but this is a pathway that I encourage you to explore, you know, when you're working with women that are presenting with these kinds of issues in their relationships. Okay, so the overall outcome then for our partners is that our own openness becomes a gift to our partner. They receive the benefits of us experiencing our own joy and delight. But this is secondary to the gift that our own joy and delight brings into our own lives. Okay, so it's great that our partners benefit from this energy, but most importantly, we benefit from this energy. Okay, and that brings us to the end of today's webinar on joy and delight. It was such a pleasure to present this to you, such an important schema to be aware of in the realm of intimate relationships. I see it a lot in my clinical practice, and also it's been something that I've had to face in my own life for the sake of my relationship. Okay, so I'd like to just see if anyone had any questions or comments. What can you do? You can take yourself off mute, or you can raise your hand if there's any questions. Or maybe you're just taking it all in and letting it sort of marinate in there. You know, some of the things that you might want to take away and unpack and process in your own time. Okay, and I trust that there's been lots of aha moments and light bulbs for you today. That's going to have a huge impact on how you approach some of these challenges that we come across in our own relationships, as well as in the work that you're doing with your own clients. Hey everyone, lovely to see some of you here today. I look forward to our final webinar on Thursday, the 9th of June at 12 o'clock, and that's on love and softening. And that's where we're addressing the emotional inhibition schema. Okay, thanks everyone for today. See you soon.